My name is Gil. I'm one of the events managers at the Wine Society. And it's a pleasure to welcome you to tonight's event, all on South Africa, a new perspective with new buyer for South Africa, Matthew Horsley. Now, Matthew is very patiently waiting just with his camera off for an invite from me. But before I invite him back onto screen as the main guest and the main event, just a few bits of housekeeping. We'd love a little bit of engagement with yourselves throughout the course of the night. So if you are willing to do so, do please use the chat function at the bottom of the screen. Let us know where you're joining us from, if you're tasting any of the wines this evening or indeed from your own selection. We'd love to know what you've got in your glass, and any of your anecdotes, any stories, do share them with us if you've been to any of the regions that we talk about or met any of the producers that we discuss. If you do have any questions for Matthew, and I'm sure many of you will have lots of questions for him, do try and pop those into the Q&A button rather than the chat, as they can be lost in the chat through all the communications. So put them in the Q&A, and they will stay front and center for Matthew and I. More chance for us to see them, certainly more chance for us to ask the questions and indeed therefore get the answers. But I think that's enough of the housekeeping. I think it's about time we invite Matthew onto the screen. Matthew, if you wouldn't mind.
Ta-da!
Hello, look at that.
Hey,
There's always a moment there when I'm just hoping that the camera does work and you come on screen.
Hello.
How are you? You all right?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks. How are you?
Very good, very good. Thank you. Thank you very much, firstly, for giving us a portion of your evening tonight. When Matthew and I were discussing, or when we were sort of having a conversation and what ultimately led to tonight's tasting, we realized that Matthew, you've been in the role of South Africa buyer for about 6 months or so now?
Yep, 6 months, almost exactly.
Almost exactly. So we thought what a great opportunity to have this tasting event, or this online event, to discuss, to get your insights, to get your perspective on South Africa, what you've uncovered, what you've discovered, and some of the challenges and some of the things that excite you about the country as a whole. But before we do pick your brains and ask you a number of questions, and indeed taste the 4 wines that you very generously selected for us to taste through tonight, I wonder if you might start by giving a little bit of an overview, if you sort of lay the ground, as it were, set the scene of South Africa in the industry, a bit of history, geography, the climates, etc.
Crikey. I'll be quite brief.
Just a small challenge.
I'll be quite brief because yeah, South Africa, where it sits at the moment, is, I think, probably saying that a country is the world's most exciting wine producing country is probably the most overused phrase, and one that I use a lot. But I really think it is. I think the whole South African industry has come on a huge amount in the last 30 years. And I've chosen a few wines today which reflect both the kind of proud history of South African wine, but also a little bit of a nod to the future. It's very hard to generalize about climate and regions because it is one of those countries that there are multiple different areas, there are multiple different climatic influences, there are multiple different soil types, altitudes, aspects, grape varieties, this, that, and whatever. So what we'll try and do is a little bit during the tasting is talk a little bit more in detail about where these particular wines come from. There you go. There's
I thought I'd bring up a map as you're mentioning it.
Major wine regions of South Africa. And so we're focusing on kind of 4-ish main regions today. But as you can see, what's really fascinating about South Africa, and something I never really quite got my head around until I actually visited, is that, as you can see in that picture, everything is quite clumped together. Everything is kind of nestled down in the southwest corner of South Africa. A lot of it's right next to the coast. And what's really amazing is that if you've traveled to South Africa, and wine is one of the reasons you're traveling there, is that you can fly into Cape Town, and within half an hour you can be in Stellenbosch, and you can pretty much go to any of the nearest hills, get to the top of them, and you'll be able to see most of the major winemaking regions of South Africa from atop of a hill, which is pretty amazing. Everything from Constantia down around Cape Town, from Stellenbosch Franc, which is slightly hidden by some of the mountains, but you get an idea of where it is, to Palm Mountain. You can see up to the Paardeberg. You can see down through False Bay, and you can start getting an idea about where the other main regions are, such as Hemelanada and over through Robertson and this, that, whatever. So you can get your bearings really quickly when you're there, which is absolutely amazing. And yeah, as I said, South Africa has come on a long way over the last 30 years. There was a pretty major handbrake applied during COVID, where basically the sale of alcohol was made pretty much illegal. And so I think a lot of producers are still kind of coming out the back of that. There is also quite a lot of issues, certainly over the last 5 years or so, when it comes to extreme heat and, most importantly, drought. And so a lot of vintages have been quite drought, quite what they would call the drought years. And so there's been a lot of management to help conserve water and to help vineyard practices in order to maintain water in the soils, which has been fantastic in a way, because it's made South Africa very much at the forefront of sustainability and viticultural practices in order to combat climate change, because they are seeing it quite abruptly compared to a lot of other wine producing regions. And out the back of it, I think, is also coming quite a lot of different winemaking as well, where people are looking to preserve freshness. And so maybe eschewing the big oaky styles and instead either using predominantly neutral vessels such as concrete or terracotta or porcelain, which we've got here with one of the wines, or using a blend where they are preserving some freshness using stainless steel again or concrete, whilst also giving oak influence, but also looking at larger oak vessels. So whereas they may have been using 225 litre barriques or 2 to 8 litre Burgundy barrels, they're now using 5 to 1,000 litre Foudres, anything which just helps retain some of that freshness in the wine. And so whilst there's been quite a few years of drought, quite a lot of fires as well, I think the quality of wine has never really been better. And from my point of view, I first went out to South Africa with Joe, my predecessor, in 2022, before I knew I was going to be taking over South Africa. And I fell in love with the country. I had been before, but in a different life, and I'd never been to Cape Town or the Western Cape. And I instantly started to get an idea of the country and the people, who are absolutely key, of course. And Joe's done an unbelievable job with South Africa. She's been buying South Africa for 19 years for the Wine Society. She's hugely well respected and has done an amazing job building what is, I think, a pretty impressive South African range. And also, she's left it in a great position for me as well, because it means that I can hit the ground running. I can start buying pretty much straight away. And naturally, with these things, it takes 6 to 9 months before any real impact that I have starts actually hitting shelves. And so pretty much all the wines we're showing tonight is still very much Joe's work. And so I'm still kind of doffing my cap to Joe in terms of some of these wines, which is great. And there's plenty to come as well. But what's also great is that as buyers, we do have a budget to buy stock to keep for long term and release later on, such as what we would call museum releases. And so there is a lot of stock which I'm like Smaug with all this gold and silver kind of waiting in the wings, just to try and figure out what to do with and when to release. So there's plenty of exciting things coming, but lots of new things as well, hopefully, which is great.
Well, thank you very much for, I threw you a little bit there with an overview of a country quite as vast as South Africa. But I think a few things that you touched upon there that no doubt we'll talk about a little bit more across the next hour or so. But certainly what we can see is evident in what you've just said there is the excitement that you have and the excitement around South Africa and the producers and the wines that are currently here and what might be around the corner. But you mentioned there you went on a buying trip with Joe back in 22, but you were also there, I think, only a matter of a few weeks after you took on the role.
Yeah. So I I found out that I was going to be taking over South Africa. Oh God, when was it? I think it was around July, August time, start of August. And so instantly, I then told I was going to be taking over in September. So instantly I was like, oh God, I've got to get out there again. I need to get my skates on and get out to the country, because when I went previously, I was, obviously it was work, but I was
Yeah.
kind of like, oh yay, this is nice, isn't it?
Yeah.
Whereas I needed to refamiliarize myself with the country and the people as well, because naturally when someone has been buying the wines of a country for so long, it takes a little while for people to, kind of remember who you are and reintroduce yourself. And see, I went out in October last year for about 10 days. So I'm going to be trying to go out twice a year, is my intention, typically just after harvest in around April, May time. And then again in October, both times for about 2 weeks. God, it's a tough job, isn't it? And so, yeah, my trip this time in October was, if we get the map up, that might just be a
Yeah.
good, because I went to some pretty quirky places. And
There we go.
so we started off really mainly around Stellenbosch, which is kind of that light bluey, greeny color just east of Cape Town, where the majority of wineries are. It's when you get where you get a lot of the kind of classic estates. We spent a bit of time in Paarl, just to the north. We spent a decent amount of time, as much as we could, really, in Franschhoek. Normally, I'd stay in Franschhoek because it's quite easy to get to everywhere from Franschhoek. But they just had two pretty significant storms last year, which meant that the back road from Stellenbosch to Franschhoek Pass was closed, which meant that we had to go all the way around the coast, basically, to Hermanus, so that kind of jutty out edge, just below Bot River, a bit further up to the left from there. We had to drive around that basically any time that we wanted to get anywhere, because we had to stay in Stellenbosch. But every man and his dog was doing the same journey, and so one point we were staying in Franschhoek, driving from Hermanus, which normally would be an hour journey over the Franschhoek Pass, took best part of 5 hours, which was pretty miserable. But then we did spend a bit of time. We actually went to Calitzdorp, which is way out to the east, that kind of peachy coloured red. East, not north, east. There you go. Peach on further along that green one. There you go. Calitzdorp. Because that road is kind of considered one of the world's great driving roads. And there's some pretty funny little places along the way as well that Richard, who I was traveling with, who's one of the importers of quite a lot of these wines that we buy, I was traveling with him, and we felt that we had a weekend, and sometimes, because we're normally doing probably anywhere between 5 and 6 producers a day, and over 2 weeks it can take its toll, and so we wanted to have a bit of a relaxed weekend, basically, where Richard drove and I sat in the passenger seat. And we drove all the way to Calitzdorp, which is about a 5 hour there, 5 hour back journey. But Calitzdorp is where a lot of the port style wines are made, because it's very continental, very hot. And we went to visit Beauplas, and they're also doing a project for us at the moment, which I cannot talk about because it's a secret. But it was fascinating to go there, and then a few more days around Hemelanade, Elgin, and that was about it. So yeah, pretty full on, but
So
fun.
yes, yeah, brilliant. Well, I think 15 minutes in, we should probably taste our first wine. Do you think?
Go on then.
Why not? I have noticed in the chat there, we'll bring that back up. A number of you have said you're joining with a few great sounding wines in your glasses as well. There's a few with the Cap Classique, the Foundry, some older vintage of a wine we'll taste a little bit later. A number of great wines there, but I hope you're all enjoying them. Do let us know how they're going with you. But if you've got this new vintage, Matthew, I just want to, if you can introduce the wine. I've got a little couple of screens to share, but if you're happy to introduce your first wine, why you chose it, and a little bit about the wine, about its history.
Yeah, great. So I think that Cap Classique is one of South Africa's styles which I perhaps don't think we've pushed as much as I think it should be. It's great value, it's fantastic quality, and I think it's absolutely fabulous. I buy England as well, and so I'm pretty, aware of traditional method styles from around the world, and I look at the quality and the price that you can get from South Africa, and I think it's absolutely fascinating. And I wanted to choose Simonsig, because I did go and visit there when I was out there, because again, they've got a project they're doing for us, which I cannot talk about, or will be revealed later this year. And I mainly wanted to go see them. Look, that's a picture I took from Simonsig, which is a picture of the Simonsberg on the left-hand side, just the mountain, just to the left-hand side there. And I mainly wanted to go see them because they were the first to create method Cap Classique, or MCC as it's often referred to. It was the late Franz Milan, so I believe grandfather of Michael Milan, who's the current winemaker, who first, having visited Champagne and was so impressed by bottle fermented sparkling wines, decided, well, they can do it, we can as well. And in 1971 produced the first MCC, of which this was. Even this brand as well, Kaapse Vonkel, which means Cape Sparkle. It's even got a little crest on the front saying since 1971, because it was South Africa's first MCC. So it is the traditional Champagne grape varieties, Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, Pinot Meunier. In terms of the actual blend, it's 48% Chardonnay, 49% Pinot Noir, 2.4% Pinot Meunier, and a cheeky little bit of 0.6% Pinot Blanc,
Right.
which fermented in stainless steel, apart from a small percent of the Chardonnay for the base wine, was fermented in oak, no malolactic, and 20 months on the lees before disgorgement. I believe the legal requirement is 9, which whether that has much impact in terms of flavour is up for negotiation. But I think the key thing for me, a lot of the time with traditional method sparkling wine, is time spent under cork after. And so this was disgorged, I think, back in November. And so I think it will get better in the next 6 months under cork. It's very fresh. It's very fruit forward at the moment. It's very citrusy, but naturally with MCC you get a little bit more palate weight, a little bit more richness. English styles are typically very linear and very crisp and very fresh, and Champagne naturally is a little bit richer, especially aged vintage styles or non-vintage styles where the house wine has lots of reserve wine in it. So I think this makes up for that lack of reserve wine or age by just having the grapes just that little bit riper, just gives this slightly more developed, fruity, richer flavor, which I think is really appealing. It means the acid's a little bit lower as well, so these can be approached really young. So this is a vintage wine. It's 2022, and I think it will get better, no doubt, over the next year, 2. I've not really had any old MCC, but I'd love to try this after 5 years under cork. I think it'd be absolutely fascinating.
Yeah. Well, it smells amazing. I'm tasting it for the first time tonight myself with you.
Yeah, I think for a traditional method wine at £14.50, it's I think naturally you'd probably compare it to Cava in a way, because price, same winemaking, different grape varieties, and so it doesn't quite have that slightly earthy, savoury notes that I tend to get with Cava. And I find the bubbles are just that little bit finer. It's a little bit more elegance. But I think it's an absolutely cracking wine. And also Simonsig I've already mentioned what South African producers are doing for climate change, but Simonsig are going above and beyond their whole spectrum of sustainability, because it's not just about what's happening in the vineyard, it's also about business sustainability and social sustainability as well. So when it comes to building houses and churches for their workers to stay in, and schools for their children, and so there's huge amounts they're doing for not just the winery and their staff, but the local community as well, which I think is hugely commendable. And it's also a cracking visit. So if anybody's out there in South Africa, go and visit, because it's a great way to start the day with some bubbly, as they'd call it out there. So
yeah. I think I read somewhere as well, members, if you've tried this wine, if you're having it tonight or have had before, do let us know your thoughts on it. If you've not tried a Method Cap Classique before, hopefully this has spurred you on to change that, and to perhaps this or another Classiques. But I read somewhere recently, I think that the sparkling wine, or South African sparkling wine, has seen a bit of an uptake in terms of production, and certainly the interest from us as consumers. There's a growing interest in sparkling wines from the Cape. Is that right?
Yes, yes, definitely in South Africa as well. There is an increase in demand. The difference is that the South African palate is naturally quite sweet, and so a lot of the traditional method sparkling wines, the MCCs produced in South Africa for the local market, typically have quite high residual sugar, which is kind of 28 to 30 grams of sugar. And so often they will produce two wines under the same label, where one is sweet for the domestic market, and the other is for the export market, where typically we prefer a drier style of MCC. But yeah, there is a huge uptake. Sparkling rosé is massive in South Africa. And so yeah, there is a big trend, because I think people are wanting that. They're wanting a wine they can chill. They're wanting something to quench their thirst that they can drink multiple glasses of after a hard day in the sun. And MCC seems to be a great vehicle for that.
It's working quite nicely on a cold
Yeah,
Wednesday evening in South Cambridgeshire as well.
yeah, absolutely.
Now, before we get to the second wine you've chosen this evening, is a white wine, the one white wine that you've selected. And I suppose noticeable in its absence is not a Chenin Blanc.
Yeah.
Chosen. And I understand, and we'll come on to obviously the grape variety and the reasons for choosing this particular wine tonight. But before we do, as Chenin Blanc is such a vital grape variety, I think comfortably the most planted variety, white or black grape varieties in South Africa.
Yeah.
I wonder if we could just talk a little bit about the two kind of main styles of wines that producers ultimately create, and there's two different wine styles with Chenin Blanc, and where you see the grape variety, any particular wines or regions or estates that you're excited about, and what's in the future.
Yeah, great question. So really, I'd probably split it into two, distinct styles of Chenin Blanc. Historically, certainly over the last 20 years or so, the majority of Chenin styles have been quite rich. They've typically been quite oaky, and they've often had quite a lot of batonnage, so lees stirring to get that really creamy, very velvety, almost savory style that's very un-Loire. It's a very distinct South African style, that much richer, more buttery, almost treating your Chenin a bit more like your Chardonnay. Whereas there's been a more recent trend, certainly over the last 10 years or so, to working a little bit less to add flavor, texture, and instead looking to produce a more refreshing, not aromatic, because I wouldn't really class Chenin Blanc as an aromatic variety, but focusing a bit more on the grape itself. It's naturally very high in acidity, and so it's possible that previous iterations of Chenin, which do still exist, and I do still buy them, and I will continue to buy them because I think there is a market for them. But it's naturally a very high acid grape variety, and so perhaps wine producers were looking to kind of defer that acid by incorporating the lees a bit more, to incorporating oak maturation, to extend the élevage of wines, just to make them a little bit softer and a little bit more approachable to not just the local market, but also to exports. Whereas now I think winemakers have become a little bit more savvy. I think naturally, because of rising temperatures as well, means that the hunt for freshness is much more key now. And so a little bit what I mentioned earlier, people are looking to reduce the amount of oak, reduce the length of élevage, releasing their wines a little bit earlier, but filling out the mid palate, giving wines of real texture, real elegance, real purity. And I think there's lots of producers doing that style extremely well. I think probably the most well-known, probably amongst Wine Society members anyways, is Chris Alhait, who is wineries based up in the north of Hemelanada, kind of up on the Hemelanada Ridge. But he sources fruit from around the Western Cape. And he's really become famous for this amazing signature style where it seems like he's almost had no impact whatsoever, but it's so him. This wonderful purity, this beautiful texture, just the most unforced yet expressive styles of Chenin Blanc that you can hope for. And some are playing with a little bit of reduction as well, and so he does our exhibition South African Chenin Blanc, which I still think is one of the biggest coups of the wine society, is to get him to do that. It's unbelievable. There's a really nice amount of reduction on that wine, but you're still getting loads of those lovely peachy, almost apricot-y flavors that you get with Chenin, and it'll age beautifully. But then, his top wines like Cartology is one of South Africa's most famous wines now. And strictly speaking, it's not entirely Chenin Blanc, but it's as good as. And yeah, I suppose what I'm kind of jumping the gun a little bit here because it's maybe something that I'll talk about a little bit later. But I think historically, estate wines have very much been producers with their own vineyards, sourcing wines from their own vines, maybe filling in the gaps with some grapes from nearby. Whereas now the real master stroke, the difference between those old school producers and this new wave, I'm definitely jumping the gun here because I know you're going to ask me about this later, is the art of blending from across regions. And so I'll stop it there, and we'll come to it maybe in a bit. But other producers, so the richer styles. God, I'm trying to think who makes it. So I will be bringing out a Chenin Blanc a little bit later this year called Moody, or Moody,
Right.
I believe it's pronounced, who I believe are the first black-owned winery in South Africa, which when I tried their wines a few months ago, I was really impressed because the Chenin is definitely that big, rich, oaky, but still elegant and really drinkable. Sometimes those wines just you have a glass and you think, oh, that was nice, but I'm done. Whereas this just seemed to have a real kind of core of freshness as well. So I'd keep an eye out for those. I don't know when they're coming out, maybe July time, hopefully.
Okay.
I've not actually bought them yet, but I've said I would.
I've seen here as well. I think we've had a comment here about Julia's hanging on to a few bottles of Alheid's exhibition Chenin 21 to see how it ages.
Great idea. Yeah, I think I've done exactly the same with 20, and I think I've got 6 tucked away. I think it's a great idea because it's under screw cap as well, and so I think 3, well, 5 or 6 years after harvest, I think is going to be really exciting for those wines.
Yeah, you must let us know how it is when you do get around to opening those bottles, and let's see how it tastes, Julia. Matthew, as you talked about it a bit there, that one of the things that really excites me, one of many things that excites me about South Africa and the wine scene there is this. You have the traditional, I think you mentioned them as sort of the old school wine estates and the producers,
Yep.
and this new wave of winemakers, often without a sort of family connection to wine or vineyards of their own. They'll source these forgotten, almost sort of rescue and reclaim these old bush vine vineyards in inhospitable areas that yesteryear were planted in. And for me, that's a great excitement. But I seem from my position, and perhaps it's what you get as well, is a great togetherness of both, and a kind of swapping and sharing of expertise and of sort of an open communication between the two there and working together, even though sort of coming from very different approaches.
Yeah, so in a way, I think it's probably it's a moving on from the more European way of viewing things, where almost, I suppose in the German labeling, the more words on the label, the better the wine, pretty much, in terms of you're honing down to the most unique individual site. I suppose it's a bit like Burgundy as well. And in a way, a bit like Bordeaux, where you're looking at a single estate. And the more precise you are in terms of where that wine is from, the better the quality, the higher the price. It kind of throws that slightly out the window, which I think does take a while for the consumer to appreciate, because when you've got a wine like the Society South African Pinotage-Syrah, which we'll try in a minute, yes, it's not exactly a fine wine, it's under 10 quid, but it is wine of origin Western Cape or coastal region. And so you're taking fruit from multiple different regions, which naturally means that you can't call the wine Stellenbosch or Simonsberg Stellenbosch if it's specifically from the Simonsberg area. Instead, you're creating a wider geographic wine, but because, as we said earlier, this country is so diverse in terms of its soils, its grape varieties, this, that, whatever. In a way, you're creating a better wine because you may not be able to create the perfect wine just from your small 1 acre plot of Chenin Blanc on the slopes of the Helderberg, for example. And so there, as you rightly say, people like Chris, people like Eben Sardi, people like Ardi Badenhorst, and all the famous names that we all know, they're hunting out Lucas van Loggerenberg. They're all hunting out old, exciting vineyards from across the Western Cape, and they're not afraid to blend them away with other regions because they know the wine is going to be better as a result, which I think is quite exciting. They're rescuing ancient vineyards, which is exciting. They're helping keep farmers employed by having farmers look after their own vineyards better rather than having their own land and looking after it themselves, which I think is great. And they're creating some of the world's most exciting wines, which are still unbearably affordable a lot of the time. So winner, really, I think.
Talking of exciting wines and very high quality, should we try the second wine?
Yep.
So I'll just pour it myself here. Members, if you have this wine, if you haven't already, well done. But if you, now is the time to pour and taste. But yeah, Matthew, what have we got in glass 2?
Yeah, so this is a winery called the Foundry, which is probably familiar to a lot of Wine Society members. It was founded by a chap called Chris Williams, who I suppose cut his teeth as the head winemaker at Meerlust. He was there for quite a few years. He was there for about 20 years. And when he was working at Meerlust, which is famous for Bordeaux varietals, they're not exclusively Bordeaux varietals. They do have a Chardonnay and a Pinot Noir, but they certainly specialize in the Bordeaux varietals. And when Chris was winemaker there, he spoke to Hannes Meiberg, who's the owner, and I think 5th or 6th generation to be the head of the owner of Meerlust. And he said, you know what, I'd really like to have my own project, my little side hustle on the side. Would you allow me to do this and make the wines at Meerlust? And Hannes, who's the most delightful man, he's absolutely wonderful, said, yeah, of course, but you can't do Bordeaux varietals. It has to be something else. You can't, compete directly with what we're doing here at Meerlust, which I think is absolutely fair enough. And so he started focusing on Rhone varietals. So Syrah, Grenache, Grenache Blanc, Sanso, all this, that, whatever. And I think he started that quite a while ago. He started it something like 20 years ago. And I think it's been going since 2003. And he's since left Meerlust. So he left in 2020, I believe. 2021 might have when he did the final handover to a chap called Wim Truter, who is also fantastic. I love him very much. And he's now making the wine at a small little cellar in the Paardeberg, which is kind of a hop, skip, and a jump just north of Stellenbosch. It kind of separates Stellenbosch and the main Swartland area to the north. And it's an area that probably 20, 30 years ago had a bit of rap. It was kind of been seen as the Swartland light. But it was kind of the starting point of the Swartland revolution, and it was people like Eben Sardi, like Ardi, who I'd mentioned earlier, and the Molyneux who saw the potential of this site, this kind of granite outcrop, this little granite mound, just outside of Paarl, which is now its own wine of origin within inside the Paarl region of its Voor Paardeberg is the kind of district name where this wine comes from. I believe this is the final vintage of this wine where he's bought the fruit from a neighboring viticulturalist grower called Willy Mostart, who's a very well-known and hugely well-respected grower who a number of top producers buy fruit from. But this is a wine that we've bought before and have offered before, and I've loved it before. And I tried this vintage when I was out there in October. I just had a picture of Chris there, who that was him blending actually the Chardonnay from Tearhook, which we offered to members at the start of this year, which hopefully a few of you got involved in. We were doing a final blending of the Chardonnay because he hadn't done it yet. And he thought, well, why don't I do it with you guys? Because you guys are running the project. And it was fascinating. And the wine is unbelievable. For those that did go in for the Chardonnay, it is an absolute beast of a wine, and I can't wait for people to give it a go. It's big, oaky, hugely impressive, very sexy Chardonnay. But anyway, I'm here to talk about Grenache Blanc. So this particular wine, Grenache Blanc, I'll be the first to admit, normally is dull as dishwater. I find it it's a very neutral variety, doesn't really do that much in terms of single varietal wines, is typically used as a bit of a blending component. It can be quite fat, it can be quite dull. It responds to oak well, which is good, so it can take oak. I'm not saying there aren't good Grenache Blancs in the world, but in general, they're not that exciting. And Chris has always done very good ones. And when I tried this one in October, I put my nose in it and thought, holy smokes, this is really smart. Lovely, lovely flinty reduction. This kind of amazing, fresh yet overripe apricot character, unbelievable texture and weight. A lot of my tasting is kind of textural, and the wine, the texture on this wine is just so impressive. It's rich but light at the same time. It really fills the palate, but it's not heavy. And there's this real kind of almost like sucrosity, they would say in French, this kind of sweetness but no sugar. And I think the wine making on it is quite fun as well. Chris likes to experiment quite a lot, so it's 1/3 oak, 1/3 stainless steel, and 1/3 terracotta. He's a big supporter of terracotta. Was it terracotta or porcelain? Terracotta or porcelain? Can't remember. Terracotta, good. I think I did a tasting for staff a few weeks ago and I said porcelain and they're like, oh, that's weird. But no, terracotta. So I'm also, this is getting very personal, I'm also a massive clay terracotta skeptic when it comes to white wine. Everybody says you can't taste it. I think you can. I think you can taste clay maturation in wine. It gives this claggy, kind of drying sensation at the back of your palate. And I find that wines entirely matured in clay, I struggle with. It's mainly white wines. Reds don't get it so much because there's enough fruit and alcohol and sweetness to counteract it. But I do struggle a lot with wines entirely in clay. But Chris assures me that where he gets this particular terracotta from, the kiln that they use, the sources from Spain, the kiln that they use can go up to 1200 degrees. And supposedly, the hotter the kiln, the less of that impact has. Combine that also with the use of stainless steel and a little bit of old oak as well. I don't get that kind of drying clagginess on the back palate, which is good. What's also quite fascinating about Chris is that the great thing about those inner vessels, where there's very minimal oxygen coming in, the shape of them is also hugely important. So normally everybody talks about eggs. Eggs, the shape of an egg. I don't need to I don't need to show you.
I like that though. That's
Yeah. Can't really do that. There you go. Egg. Most of them are egg, small at the top, big at the bottom. And supposedly this helps the wine go round, the lees in the wine go round, almost like a kind of vortex like that. Supposedly, according to Chris, how he proves this, I don't know. He flips them upside down, which means that apparently they go up and down the lees, which according to him gives greater blending of the lees with the wine, which helps, I suppose, give this extra texture.
Yeah.
And if it's true, great, fascinating. But I do find you get this wonderful texture to this wine, lovely smokiness, real purity, but great complexity as well. And there's nice kind of supple acid. There's a little bit of minerality there, which is probably the faux pas word of the wine
Well, I was
industry.
going to say that you've mentioned minerality.
Yeah. Well, there was a question on minerality in my MW exam last year, and I avoided it like the plague. I was like, "There's no way I'm getting involved in that." But I think
Was
it's
Chris with this one? Sorry, has Chris then always used that kind of the third terracotta, or is this something that's kind of evolved? This is the evolution, and it's
no,
a
I think
reasonably
it's
recent.
evolved.
Yeah.
Things evolved. I think I actually had a note for the previous vintage. Bear with me 2 seconds.
That's all right. I do find that fascinating, and yeah, by inverting the egg and the differences it can bring, but the wine does have a tremendous texture to it, as you say, and a beautiful body and structure there.
So I think the 2021, according to Joe's notes, was 60% older oak, 30% terracotta, and 10% tank. So it sounds like he's upped the tank a bit.
Yeah.
Just to give a bit more freshness.
Mm-hmm.
But also, this wine, about 2 weeks after I tasted it, got 5 stars in platters and lots of very high results. And I'm not saying awards are everything, but I do think platters is a pretty good place to start in terms of, because Joe always said she's bought for so many regions at the Wine Society. She's bought Bordeaux, Loire, Alsace, Portugal, probably loads of others that I can't remember. But it's South Africa that she always gets the most recommendations from members on, more than any. And I agree with her already. I get lots of emails from members, which I love, saying, "Oh, go here, go here, go here," because there's clearly huge interest in the wines of South Africa, which is good. We need to crack on, don't we?
Well, on to another question here before we move on to the two red wines. You've mentioned a number of regions, a number of producers already as well, but are there any under the radar or yet to be truly kind of discovered for the quality that they are in terms of sub-regions? Is there anything there that's just around the corner that your top tips?
I think the one person that we work with currently that is doing really exciting things is Sam Lamson at Minimalist, doing Syrah in Elgin and Cape Agulhas, the two coolest areas in South Africa, also two of the hardest places to grow grapes. And so I think his wines are like tear-inducingly beautiful sometimes. And I first visited him when I was out in the Cape with Joe. I'd never met him before. I'd never tried his wines. We sat in the vineyard, had a little picnic, and I was blown away by how amazing his wines were. And he is horribly young. It annoys me how young and talented. I think he's only 24 or something like that. It's outrageous. And so he's the one I'd say always look out for.
Okay. You were saying you were blown away. That is the Cape there actually quite a windy and inhospitable area as well. So you may have been
very windy, very wet, very cool, very intense kind of peaks and troughs in terms of temperature. The winters are bitterly cold. And so, it's tough. And also the money there is not in grapes. The money there is in apples. Appletiser is basically produced there. I think even it makes me laugh because Radford Dale, the producer of the next wine, they have a new site down in Elgin, and I think their winery is on Appletiser Road or something like that, or it's the next one along from Appletiser Road. So you drive through Elgin and everything is just apple trees and pear trees. So the money is not in grapes there, which makes it even more impressive.
So that's something that you're excited about, region producers there. What about if we flip that? And again, you've mentioned one or two already, but what are some of the sort of significant challenges, human or or natural, and the overcoming? You mentioned about drought and some others, but how are producers kind of generally seeing out the challenges and overcoming them?
That's a big question.
I know. You have 2 minutes.
A lot of work's being done in the vineyards, whether it's use of cover crops, less tilling to reduce evaporation from the soils. I mean, we're talking specifically about droughts here,
Yeah.
but also fires are a major issue. Sometimes there's just not much that can be done about fires. I know that a few people got hit pretty heavily by mildew this year from rain, excessive rain. As I mentioned, the storms last year were pretty excessive. Again, sometimes there's just not much you can do about it. When a flood wipes out a whole acre of vineyard, like it did at Beaumont, down in Bot River, there's not much you can do about it. You just got to say, bugger. Thankfully for them, it was mainly their kind of apple and pear trees, which went. Most of their vineyards are on slightly higher land, but it cut the main bridge going up to Gabriel's Kloof, where Crystalum are based, and so it's sometimes almost like more of a logistical problem. And naturally, a lot of people, when I was out there, the rain was so heavy that they couldn't get the tractors into the vineyard to continue their spray programs. And so either it meant that they just had to forego it because the tractors were literally stuck in the vineyards, or they had to do it by hand, which is hugely laborious and can take forever. And often by the time you get to the places that need spraying the most, it's too late. And so that's a big issue. And so I suppose dealing with water retention in the soils is difficult because you're wanting to keep as much water in the soils as possible because you're affecting drought, but then you get crazy years where there's so much water that you can't get rid of the stuff. And so it's every year is different. It's so difficult. It's so difficult.
Could be a grape grower.
I know.
Well, as you've mentioned Radford Dale already there, and I'll certainly be letting my son know the connection with Appetizer, one of his favourite drinks. Shall we look at the third wine?
Yeah.
You've got in your glass there. I've got mine. So what have we got here?
This is the wine that actually Jo put together. She had in the making before she handed over to me. And so I think we released it about 2 or 3 weeks after I took over. So obviously I claimed it as my own and thought, wow, what great work I'm already doing. But I think that having a South African red is something that's probably been on the cards for quite a while. Naturally, we wanted it to be Pinotage because Pinotage is very much South Africa's own grape variety. For those that don't know, it's a cross between Pinot Noir and Sanso, but it's quite different to both of them in style, which is quite weird. But I think a question that's coming up is how is Pinotage changing, I imagine, and a lot of the Pinotage is going towards this more fresher, purer, less savory style, and we wanted to kind of, well, I assume, I mean, I didn't blend this wine, Jo chose it, but the addition of Syrah, I think, just to kind of take away some of the intense pinotaginess that can be off-putting for people, that kind of slightly tarmacy, hot rubber character, which is becoming less and less a thing in South Africa, definitely. But I'm also of the belief that there is a big following for Pinotage amongst Wine Society members. And if a wine that is Pinotage doesn't smell of Pinotage, I'm also kind of like, what's the point? I want a wine to have some of that Pinotage-ness. And I think this has got just the right amount. There is also the Syrah spice and the sweetness that you get. Pinotage, I find, can be quite tannic, and it can be quite like an abrupt tannin. Not a hugely generous one. There's high tannin varieties where the tannins kind of flow, whereas Pinotage tannin, I find, is kind of and stop and just kind of linger there. So a little bit of sweetness from the Syrah and the slightly smoother, softer tannins that Syrah can give just works really nicely. In terms of the wine itself, so as I mentioned before, it's wine of origin coastal region, so it's a blend of 2 different regions along the coast, of course. So it's young vine Syrah from Stellenbosch. So Radford Dale, the producer of this wine, Alex Dale, who's one of the founders, is one of the most obsessed wine society people I've ever met. I love him to bits. He's absolutely fantastic. He's super bright. You grew up in Burgundy, but I believe he's from an English family, and splits his time very much between South Africa and Burgundy. He also imports a lot of Burgundy into South Africa. And him and a friend founded Radford Dale, originally based in Stellenbosch. They recently bought a property in Elgin during lockdown, which he would probably claim is the craziest decision anybody ever made in lockdown, was to expand and buy a site and vineyards which are 100% organic in Elgin, which is insane, but the wines are very good, and I have bought one which is coming soon. But this wine, so it's mainly from their Stellenbosch base, so it's from young Syrah vines on the Helderberg, which is kind of in the southern part of Stellenbosch towards the coast, and then older vine Pinotage from Swartland. So because you've got those two regions, you can either, we could have called it wine of origin Western Cape or wine of origin coastal region, but coastal region is a slightly more defined regional name, and so we went for that instead. No oak. The blend itself is 66% Pinotage and 34% Syrah, and I think it's got really the best of both worlds. It's definitely got Pinotage character. It's got that savory, spicy, dried kind of oriental spice character that Pinotage can get, but that lovely sweet Syrah fruit. And I think it's really very nice.
Yeah, it's certainly got that wonderful spiciness to it, which I like. And I think Pinotage is coming up to its centenary year. Was it 1925?
Yeah, something like that, isn't it? Yeah, you probably know more than me. Yeah.
Next year, I'll say that with more confidence. 1925 was when it was created. So yes, next year. But no, it's a wonderful freshness there. It's got the spice. The tannins are quite very smooth. It's an incredibly fruit driven with that added spice and complexity and that smokiness, as you say. It's a very, very good wine. One that you've claimed there.
I claim it as my own. Yeah.
Him as your own.
Who knows? I mean, that blend will probably change over the years. You know, if we feel that the Pinotage from the Swartland is shining in a particular year, then I'm not averse to adjusting it. You know, we want to make the best wine possible. And I think under 10 squid, I think it's pretty good.
Yeah, yeah. We've got a question here actually that's coming from Mike. I'll just read it out for you if you haven't seen it on the Q&A, but we can certainly sort of ask it at this point, perhaps. For obvious historical reasons, the South African industry is very white in terms of racially white. Is there a growth in black quality winemakers, and is the society offering any such wines? You've obviously touched on it a little bit already.
Yeah.
But, you could expand a bit more.
Yeah, great question. The answer is unequivocally yes. There is a much larger group of black winemakers coming through in South Africa, which is fantastic to see. I went to a conference at Cape Wine in 2022. It's one of the main reasons we went out there, and it's almost like now the push now is the next step. There are plenty of people of black origin in the winery, but the problem at the moment now is black ownership. It's having wineries land owned by black South Africans rather than them just working for a winery owned by white people. And so I am keen to look into this as much as I can. I've already mentioned Moody, who, as I mentioned, I believe are the first black-owned winery in South Africa. And so we've got the Chenin Blanc, and I'm going to be buying a Pinotage from them as well, which is rootin' tootin' Pinotage. It is big, savoury, but again with great freshness. I'm also doing a Zoom tasting in July, yet date I think to be exactly confirmed, with a very good friend of mine, Mags Janjo, who is an importer from South Africa, who I'll be buying the Moody wines through. I'm slightly reticent because I've not actually bought them yet, but I've told him I will, and I've reserved the wines, and so hopefully he's actually reserved them for me, where we will hopefully have of him, of course, then hopefully a representative from Moody, as well as the head Mpello from Mama Africa, whose wines we do also stock. And so we're going to do a bit of a Zoom tasting, obviously focusing on their wines and talking about their backgrounds and their history and their wineries, but also talking a little bit more about the current situation in South Africa and what everybody can do to promote Black-owned wineries, Black-made wine. And so, yeah, it's really exciting. We may well also have Nsiki from Aslina as well, whose wines we've been following for quite a few years. She's absolutely wonderful. And so, yeah, it's definitely one of my focus points straight away off the bat is to promote more Black-owned, Black-made wine.
And members, that particular event that Matthew's referring to will be online very soon. So we'll have that date confirmed up very soon, and that'll be online in the next few weeks. But yeah, very much looking forward to that event. And sounds like the Pinotage that you mentioned there being a very Pinotage and blockbuster and savoury will be right up the street of a couple of their our members in their comments there really like the savoury Pinotage styles. So perhaps one for them. But before we look at the final wine, just wanted to ask one more question about many producers sort of around the world that focus a great deal of their energy, quite rightly, on social responsibility. And do you feel that the South African voices, or do you think that the South Africa are one of the leading voices in this regard across all of social responsibility? And is that something that they're doing that others should follow?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm always amazed by how much producers are doing to increase their kind of social do-gooding. But that sounds awful because it's not do-gooding. They're doing it because they really think they should and they need to. And so a lot of producers that we work with have a lot of workers who, in perhaps other countries, it's very seasonal, the work. And so it's, especially in Europe, somewhere like, pretty much across Europe, harvest is a very seasonal thing, and you'll have groups of pickers basically traveling throughout Europe, picking throughout the countries following the harvest. Whereas in South Africa, a lot of the people are South African, they live in South Africa, and they are employed a lot of the time throughout the year. They're provided accommodation, they're provided education for their children, healthcare. So producers like Villera, Simonsig, as I mentioned, really are pioneers in terms of social responsibility. And Grenache are another one who are a huge kind of leader in sustainability. As I mentioned, sustainability, as Johan Grenache kind of famously quotes a lot of the time, is that it's like a three-stool chair, three-legged stool. If you knock one of the legs out, you're going to fall over. And so those being, environmental, financial, and social. And so if you knock the social side out, then you don't have a sustainable business. And so they're the people that we really want to champion. And we are doing that at the moment at the Wine Society. We only very recently launched it, but we do have a particular part of the website where it's producers that we think are kind of going that extra mile to help with sustainability. The exact page on the website is, it's called Producers Making a Difference. So if you go onto the Buy Wine section and then under Discover, so we do have a section where we are highlighting wines from producers that we think are really going that extra mile, and we're going to be constantly adding to it. There's just a very kind of who instantly springs to mind for us at the moment on there at the moment, but I think that's literally got announced maybe last week, if that. And so it's something that we're keen to promote. And I do think South Africa are, I'm not saying it's perfect, there is still a long way to go for a lot of the areas and a lot of the practices, but I think we are highlighting and certainly buying from those who I think are doing all the right things.
Members, what I'll do is I'll share that link that Matthew's mentioning in email tomorrow there, so and certainly I'll have a look through it myself as well. But looking at the time there at 7 o'clock, time is flying by. Should we taste the fourth and final wine?
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, was it supposed to finish at 7?
No, 7:15.
Oh, great.
We're all right.
Oh, we're doing fine. Cool.
But yeah, so what have we got in the glass here then, Matthew?
So the final bottle is Hogan. So I'll probably show people the bottles. So I chose this mainly because I absolutely love Jocelyn, the winemaker. I think she's absolutely wonderful. I think she's hugely talented and makes some wonderful wines. But also I chose it because I do think Cab Franc, look at that lovely 3-star review. I do think Cab Franc has got real potential and excitement in South Africa. As I mentioned, temperatures rising. There's Jocelyn, a picture of her that I took in her lovely garden back in October. With temperatures rising, Cabernet Franc naturally has lovely freshness, high acid, and this kind of almost herbaceous, lifted character, which retains itself even in pretty hot years. And so a lot of producers are using it more in their blends to give freshness to their Bordeaux blends. But also there's a number of producers doing really exciting things with single varietals. And there's quite a few wines which I could have chosen for this spot. I could have chosen any of Lucas van Loggerenberg's Breton wines, of which we've got quite a few online at the moment. Raats do a fantastic Cabernet Franc, which is often seen as one of, if not the best in South Africa. But I thought I wanted to highlight Hogan, Jocelyn's wine. It's 2022 vintage. This also recently just got 5 stars in platters. And I wanted to choose this because for me it is absolute nose in a glass Cabernet Franc. It's an absolute blind tasting banker. Like, it is so pungent with that wonderful kind of red currant, red cherry, and that lovely stemmy, stalky, woody, barky Cabernet Franc character, but with lovely texture. Cabernet Franc, for me, I think, has got, as a grape, when done well, has got some of the loveliest tannins for red wine. They're present, but kind of supportive, really fine, really generous. I think she's done a great job on this wine.
That's me thinking that you picked this wine because it's one of my favourite grape varieties. But I'm very happy that you did pick a Cabernet Franc for sure.
Well, it's not only your favourite grape, one of your favourite grape varieties, but also, to mention Jo again, as a lover of the Loire, I've been lucky enough to travel out to the Loire a number of times with Jo. She's Cabernet Franc obsessed, and so this is another wine which I think she would have originally tasted this vintage, but not bought it. But I tasted it, and I was like, well, of course I'm going to buy it because Jo tasted it and loved it, and I love it as well. And if anybody knows Cab Franc, it's Jo from many years buying the Loire, and there's just this lovely richness to the fruit as well, but not kind of taking away that real elegance and purity and fine tannin and kind of blueberry fruit. It's probably what this South African style has a bit more than the Loire styles. Loire for me is very red fruit dominated. The South African styles typically have a little bit more kind of blueberry core to the palate, which I suppose because it's a lot warmer, it's a much warmer country, and so naturally those grapes are going to get a bit riper. But yes, Jocelyn's wonderful. She's hugely talented. She graduated Stellenbosch University in the same class as Chris Alheit, so they're very close friends. They share a lot of tips and tricks together, and she also makes fantastic Chenin Blanc, which we also sell. And so do check those out as well. In terms of the winery itself, so she founded the winery. It's a family-run winery in 2014. It's very, very small. The family's located in the Banhoek Valley in Stellenbosch, but they source grapes from around the Western Cape. So again, it's one of those examples of them buying grapes in. There's a picture of the kind of old Dutch-style house, which I believe is where her grandparents still live, who I think are in their 90s, and they still live there. But it's a really beautiful place. It's kind of from behind me taking that picture is just the most wonderful garden filled with fantastic flowers, which is really rather nice. But so this wine itself is sourced from 13-year-old vines, 1-3, the lower slopes of the Helderberg, but it's on the south side of the Helderberg, which is just 2 kilometers from the coast. So really nice, cool maritime viticulture. They do quite a lot of leaf removal just before harvest, just to get that extra sun exposure to remove any of that kind of pyrazine character,
Yes.
where you get that really intense green herbaceousness, which is unpleasant. Whereas I think this has got the herbaceous character, but it's not pyrazine. It's not intense like capsicum or green bell pepper.
Yeah.
It's much riper, almost like when you cook green pepper, it almost becomes sweeter. It's more that rather than the freshly cut raw character.
Mhm.
No whole bunch. She'll de-stem the Cabernet because again, you don't want any more stalkiness in there. Open top fermenter, spontaneous fermentation, minimal kind of punching down. I think they do twice a day for a few months, and then matured in 225 barriques for 8 months. 5 stars in platters. Very elegant. I like it a lot.
It's tremendously elegant, and yes, a very, very good wine indeed. Very good wine. We've had, yeah, so we've had a message here on the chat saying that the Hogan Cabernet Franc is lovely, but will be even better in 3 or 4 years' time, which I haven't got. I can bring up your tasting out your drinking window, but yeah, I would definitely agree with that.
Totally agree. I think Cabernet Franc ages wonderfully well, and so I totally agree. But I really really think it's delicious now. But it will
Yeah.
age. Some kind of top Cabernet Francs, they can be a bit austere, a little bit firm in their youth. I put 2030. Gosh, check me out.
2030, okay.
Aren't I
Yeah.
brave? Yeah, 2030. I think that's absolutely fine. I think
Yeah.
maybe 2027 might be when it's at its best. And who knows after that? I'm probably one of the few buyers at the wine society who kind of goes a little bit more punchy with that
Right.
with their drink dates, but I'll probably have it come back and hit me in there soon.
I can see that certainly with 30. Is this then a Cabernet Franc's a varietal that I mean, I don't have the stats. I'm not asking you for the stats in terms of its plantings, but it must be a fairly small percentage of vineyard given over to Cabernet Franc. But is it growing?
So yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It is pretty small fry, but it is growing, particularly around the Stellenbosch area. I'm trying to see if I can quickly get some stats. I can't because also it's fine. But we are seeing more Cabernet Franc single varietals, but also more Cabernet Franc dominated Bordeaux blends. So Bosch are probably the most famous one now that are the new producers with their Helderberg Cabernet Franc dominated Bordeaux blend, which is sensationally good. And the trilogy, Warwick trilogy, is also Cabernet Franc dominated, which is also one of my favorite Bordeaux blends. So I think there's a real excitement amongst producers about the freshness and the aromatics that you can get from the Cabernet Franc in these styles, which I think is very, very exciting.
Yeah. Tremendous. Well, no, thank you very much for that. Members, if you have any more questions here, we've got about 5 or 6 minutes left in the session. Absolutely fire some questions our way if you have any. Otherwise, I do have a relatively light question to finish on. If it's a question to finish, we've tasted some amazing wines and great insights and perspective, Matthew. So thank you very much for that. But one thing I asked you just before we came on in the light is a number of our producers that I've had the good fortune of meeting, a few of them over the years, and they're almost as fanatical about surfing as they are as they are about wine. I just wonder if they managed to tempt you. Next time you're out there, are you going to hit the waves with them?
Oh yeah, they are surfing obsessed. And I'm trying to think of Miles Mossop, who is one of the coolest guys I've ever met. He's painfully cool. I think he basically classes that they're surfers who make some wine. A lot of them. No, him, Duncan Savage, obviously an ex-professional surfer. He's surfing all the time. I did tell you an anecdote before, but when I was there in October, I purposefully put him as my last visit because I was going straight from there to the plane, and B, I knew he was going to try and take me surfing, and so I knew I had a good excuse because I didn't want to be covered in sand to then be sat on a plane for 12 hours, however long it was. So I managed to get away quickly, but I would love to. Don't think I've ever surfed properly in my life before, and so I couldn't think of better people. But yeah, him. I don't think Chris Allight, he's more of a fisherman. Chris
No.
Allight loves his fishing, as does Lucas. But Peter Allen at Crystalline, I know, is a very keen surfer, is out every morning. Miles Mossop, as I mentioned, hugely keen surfer. Schalk Joubert at Highbosch must be a surfer, definitely. He's also painfully cool. My God.
Makes some amazing wines as well. Actually, there's ones that we've not
He
talked
really
about.
does. Yeah, he
But,
really
yeah.
does. And he's just a delight. Oh yeah, and what's his name? Bevan at Newton
Oh
Johnson.
yes, Ian Johnson. Yeah.
Apparently he's a really good surfer as well,
Yes.
like really good, and a bit of a lunatic as well. So yeah.
Brilliant. Well, Matthew, again, thank you very much for this evening. Thank you for showcasing these 4 wines and talking through South Africa to
Do you
us.
have a favorite of those wines? Which one do you like? What are you going to be drinking with your dinner?
It's going to have to be, I think, the Hogan Cabernet Franc. Yeah, I think. Yeah, definitely.
Nice. I will say also, do message any suggestions. The thing that's amazed me so much, especially from being a buyer for fairly niche regions up until South Africa, England, Greece, and Hungary, just where I have to work quite hard to find the best wines. In South Africa, the hard thing is trying to not buy everything. The quality of wine is so eye-wateringly good, and the more suggestions, recommendations that our members, it's like the ultimate hive of knowledge, our membership. And so do continue to send me suggestions, send pictures, places to go, people to see. It's all about sharing. So I'm still on my South Africa learning journey, and so I'd love to pick your brains about it. So do send anything you can.
Well, there are members. Get on the emails. Send Matthew all of your suggestions, tips. I'll be doing the same thing. And if you need anybody to head out with you on a buying trip, of course, do let me know. But no, thank you again. Thank you for a great evening, members. I hope you've enjoyed tonight's tasting and event as much as we have. Thank you all very much for joining us. And there will be lots of other events coming online very soon. And we've just released a few more, I think, coming up. So I think the next online event that we have is, I believe, a Burgundy on Primeur. Actually, no, Friday. We have a Friday night takeaway tapas with my colleagues Catherine and Emma this Friday, and then in a couple of weeks' time we have a Burgundy 2022 on Primeur tasting or talk with your colleague Matthew Toby, the buyer for Burgundy, and many others online now and in the pipeline. So many more to come. Hopefully we'll see you all then. Otherwise, have a great rest of the evening and the rest of the week. Thank you all very much.
Thanks, everybody. See you soon. Bye.